I never thought moving into a nice suburban neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona, would turn my life into a legal nightmare. But that's exactly what happened when Brenda Morrison decided my backyard barbecue setup was her business. My name is Stephen Yates, and I had just purchased a beautiful 3-bedroom ranch-style house on Cactus Road about 6 months before everything went sideways. The house came with a decent-sized backyard, perfect for my weekend grilling hobby. I had invested in a top-of-the-line stainless steel grill and a proper propane setup, everything installed by a licensed contractor according to code. I loved spending Saturday afternoons grilling burgers, steaks, and experimenting with different recipes while my golden retriever, Max, lazed around in the shade. Brenda lived 2 houses down from me, and from day one, she made it clear she was the self-appointed guardian of our neighborhood standards. She was the HOA president, a position she apparently took as seriously as a Supreme Court justice takes their oath. The woman was in her mid-50s, always dressed like she was about to attend a country club luncheon, even when she was just checking her mailbox. Her hair was cut in that classic speak-to-the-manager style, blonde with darker roots that she tried to hide, and she wore oversized sunglasses that seemed permanently attached to her face. The first time I met Brenda was at a mandatory HOA meeting 2 weeks after I moved in. She had given me a thin smile and handed me a 3-inch thick binder containing all the community rules and regulations. I had skimmed through it, noting the usual stuff about lawn maintenance, acceptable fence colors, and noise restrictions. Nothing seemed too unreasonable at the time, though I did notice the regulations were oddly specific about things like the exact shade of beige allowed for house trim and the maximum height of garden gnomes. Everything was fine for the first few months. I kept my lawn trimmed, my house maintained, and I minded my own business. I worked as a software engineer for a tech company downtown, putting in my 40 hours a week and enjoying my quiet evenings and weekends. My neighbors on either side were friendly enough. To my left was an elderly couple, the Hendersons, who mostly kept to themselves but always waved when they saw me. To my right was a young family with 2 kids who occasionally had loud birthday parties, but nothing that ever bothered me. The trouble started on a warm Saturday in late March. I had set up my grill around noon, planning to cook some chicken and vegetables for a small get-together with a few friends from work. The propane tank was nearly full. I had just replaced it the week before, and everything was working perfectly. I was about an hour into my cooking when I heard the distinctive click of high heels on my driveway. Brenda appeared at the edge of my backyard, her nose wrinkled like she had just stepped in something unpleasant. "Stephen," she called out, not bothering with pleasantries. "I need to speak with you about a serious matter." I set down my tongs and walked over to the fence line. "Hey, Brenda, what's going on?" "I'm smelling propane," she announced, gesturing dramatically toward my grill. "It's extremely strong and it's concerning. I'm worried about safety hazards in the neighborhood." I glanced back at my setup. Everything looked fine, no hissing sounds, no visible issues. My grill seems to be working normally. I just checked all the connections before I started cooking. "Well, clearly something is wrong," she insisted, crossing her arms. "The smell is overwhelming. I could smell it from inside my house." This seemed odd to me because her house was 2 doors down and there was barely any wind that day. "I'm not smelling anything unusual," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly. "But I can double-check everything if you'd like." "I think you need to turn that off immediately," Brenda said, her voice taking on that authoritative tone that I would come to know all too well. "This is a safety issue, and as HOA president, I have a responsibility to ensure all residents are following proper safety protocols. I felt my patience starting to thin. Brenda, I had this installed by a licensed contractor. Everything is up to code. I have all the permits and documentation. That may be, but if I'm smelling propane, there's clearly a leak somewhere, she said. I'm going to have to insist you shut it down until you can have it properly inspected. My friends were due to arrive in less than an hour, and I had food on the grill. Look, I'll check everything again right now. If I find any issue, I'll shut it down immediately. Fair enough. Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. I suppose that will have to do, but I'm documenting this incident, Stephen. If I continue to smell propane, I'll have no choice but to take further action. She turned and walked away before I could respond, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. I stood there for a moment, bewildered by the entire interaction, then went back to check my grill setup thoroughly. Everything was secure, no leaks, no issues whatsoever. I even used some soapy water to check all the connections, watching for bubbles that would indicate escaping gas. Nothing. My friends arrived and we had a great afternoon. Nobody else mentioned smelling anything unusual. The Hendersons were even sitting on their back porch during part of it, and they didn't seem concerned. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of my troubles with Brenda. I was right. 2 days later, I found a formal notice from the HOA in my mailbox. The letter, printed on official HOA letterhead, informed me that I was being cited for creating a potential safety hazard, and that I needed to have my propane system inspected by a certified professional within 7 days or face fines. The letter was signed by Brenda in her capacity as HOA president, with a CC to the entire HOA board. I called the phone number listed for HOA inquiries, and Brenda answered on the second ring. HOA president speaking. Brenda, it's Stephen Yates. I just got your letter about the propane inspection. Yes. Well, as I explained, this is a safety matter, she said primly. The HOA bylaws give us the authority to require inspections when there are legitimate safety concerns. But I already had everything professionally installed and inspected when I bought the house, I protested. I don't understand why I need another inspection. Because I reported a gas leak, Brenda said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. Which means there needs to be a follow-up inspection. It's really quite simple, Stephen. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Fine. I'll have someone come out and inspect it. But just so we're clear, I'm confident they won't find anything wrong. We'll see about that, Brenda said, and hung up. Annoyed but wanting to resolve the issue, I scheduled an appointment with a local propane company for that Friday afternoon. I took a half-day off work to be there for the inspection. The technician, a friendly guy in his 30s named Mike, showed up right on time in a company van. So what seems to be the problem? Mike asked, pulling out his equipment. I explained the situation, including Brenda's complaint and the HOA notice. Mike listened, nodding occasionally, then did a thorough inspection of my entire propane setup. He checked the tank, all the lines, the connections to the grill, everything. He even used a professional gas detector to scan the entire area. After about 30 minutes, Mike stood up and wiped his hands on his pants. Well, I've got good news for you. Your system is perfect. No leaks, no issues whatsoever. Everything is installed correctly and safely. Whoever did your initial installation knew what they were doing. Relief washed over me. Great. Can you provide me with a written report stating that? Absolutely, Mike said, pulling out a tablet. I'll email it to you within the hour. But just out of curiosity, where does your neighbor live? The one who reported the smell. I pointed toward Brenda's house. 2 houses down, that one with the beige trim and the perfectly manicured roses. Mike frowned and pulled out his gas detector again. Mind if I walk around a bit? Professional curiosity. Be my guest, I said, following him as he walked toward the property line. As we got closer to the boundary between my yard and the Hendersons' yard, Mike's detector started beeping. His frown deepened, and he walked further, eventually ending up near the property line adjacent to Brenda's yard. The beeping got louder and more insistent. "Now that's interesting," Mike muttered. He looked at me. "Do you know your neighbors well enough to ask if I can check their property? The Hendersons are home, I think. Let me ask them." Mr. Henderson, a retired postal worker, was happy to let Mike check his yard. "I've actually been smelling something a bit odd for the past week or so," he admitted, "but I figured it was just someone's grill or something." Mike's detector led him along the property line between the Hendersons' yard and Brenda's yard. The beeping became almost continuous. "This is definitely propane," Mike said, "and it's coming from that direction." He pointed toward Brenda's backyard. "Should we let her know?" I asked. Mike nodded seriously. "Absolutely. This could be dangerous. If there's a significant leak, it could cause an explosion or fire. I need to check it out right away." We walked over to Brenda's house and rang the doorbell. She answered after a moment, her expression souring when she saw me. "What do you want, madam? I'm Mike from Desert Gas Company," Mike said, holding up his ID badge. "I was just doing an inspection next door, and my equipment is detecting a significant propane leak. It appears to be coming from your property. I need to check your system right away." Brenda's face went pale, then flushed red. "That's impossible. I don't even have a propane system." Mike held up his detector, which was beeping steadily. "Madam, I'm definitely detecting propane, and it's strongest right here at your property. Do you have a gas grill? Gas fireplace? Anything that uses propane?" "Well, yes, I have a grill on my back patio," Brenda admitted reluctantly. "But it's only a few years old. There couldn't possibly be a leak." "May I check it?" Mike asked. "This is a serious safety issue." Brenda hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but she couldn't really refuse. "Fine. Come through the side gate." We followed her around to her backyard, which was as meticulously maintained as I had expected. Her grill was on a stone patio, a built-in unit that looked expensive. Mike immediately went to work with his equipment, and within seconds, the detector was going crazy near the grill's gas line. "Madam, you have a significant leak in your propane system," Mike said seriously. "I need to shut off your gas immediately. This is extremely dangerous." Brenda's face went from red to white. "But how? I just had this installed last year." Mike was already working to shut off the gas line. "Sometimes fittings can fail, or there can be issues with the installation. But you need to have this repaired immediately, and you shouldn't use this system until it's fixed." I tried to keep the satisfaction off my face, but it was difficult. Brenda had spent the last week insisting I had a dangerous leak, making me jump through hoops to prove my system was safe, and all along, the leak was on her property. Mike continued his inspection, finding multiple issues with Brenda's propane setup. "Your installation wasn't done properly," he explained. "Several of these fittings are loose, and this valve here is actually damaged. I'm surprised you haven't had a problem before now." "But I hired a licensed contractor," Brenda protested weakly. "You'll need to contact them about that," Mike said. "But for now, your gas is shut off, and you absolutely cannot use this system until these repairs are made. I'm also required by law to report this to the fire marshal because of the severity of the leak." Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't. The evidence was right there, beeping insistently from Mike's detector. She glanced at me, and I could see the embarrassment and anger warring on her face. "I'll be going back to finish my report for Mr. Yates' property," Mike said. "But you should call a reputable propane company today to get this fixed. I can recommend several if you'd like." "That won't be necessary," Brenda said stiffly. We left her standing in her backyard, looking stunned. As soon as we were back on my property, Mike shook his head. "That was one of the worst DIY propane jobs I've seen in a while. Someone definitely cut corners on that installation." "So just to be clear," I said, "the propane smell she was reporting was actually coming from her own property." 100%, Mike confirmed. "Your system is perfect. Hers is a disaster waiting to happen. Good thing we caught it when we did." Mike sent me his full report that evening, and I immediately forwarded it to the HOA board. I also included a politely worded email explaining that the propane smell Brenda had been complaining about had been traced to her own property, not mine, and that the citation against me should be withdrawn. I expected that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next day, I received another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that I was being fined $500 for causing a false alarm and wasting HOA resources on an unnecessary investigation. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling my blood pressure rise higher. I immediately called the HOA office again. This time, a different board member answered. Her name was Patricia, and she was the vice president. "I'm calling about this fine I just received," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "This doesn't make any sense." The gas company confirmed that my system is fine, and that the leak was actually on Brenda's property. "Yes, I'm aware of the situation," Patricia said, her tone apologetic. "But Brenda insists that if you hadn't been using your grill in the first place, she wouldn't have noticed the smell and called in the complaint." "That's absurd," I said. "How is it my fault that she has a gas leak on her property?" "I understand your frustration, Mr. Yates," Patricia said. "But as HOA president, Brenda has broad discretion in enforcement matters. The fine has been approved by a majority of the board." "How many board members are there?" I asked. "5, including Brenda." "And how many voted for this fine?" There was a pause. "3, including Brenda." "Yes." I rubbed my forehead, feeling a headache coming on. This is retaliation, pure and simple. She's embarrassed that the leak was on her property, so she's taking it out on me. "I can't speak to Brenda's motivations," Patricia said carefully. "But the fine stands unless you want to appeal it at the next board meeting." "When is that?" "Next month." A month was too long to let this sit. "Fine, I'll be there, but I'm also consulting with an attorney about this." "That's certainly your right," Patricia said. "But I should warn you that the HOA bylaws require you to exhaust all internal appeals before pursuing legal action." After hanging up, I sat in my living room, fuming. Max came over and put his head on my knee, sensing my stress. I had bought this house because I wanted a peaceful place to live, not to get into legal battles with my HOA. But Brenda had made it clear she wasn't going to let this go. I spent that evening researching HOA law in Arizona and reading through the massive binder of bylaws Brenda had given me when I moved in. The more I read, the more concerned I became. The bylaws gave the HOA president an enormous amount of power, including the ability to levy fines, require inspections, and even place liens on properties for unpaid fines. There were supposed to be checks and balances through the board, but if Brenda had even one other board member on her side, she could do pretty much whatever she wanted. The next morning, I decided to talk to some of my other neighbors to see if anyone else had issues with Brenda. I started with the young family to my right, the Porters. Jenny Porter answered the door with her toddler on her hip. "Hi, Stephen," she said with a warm smile. "What can I do for you? I explained the situation with Brenda, the propane complaint and the fine. Jenny's smile faded as I talked. "Oh God, you too," she said. "Come in, let me tell you about our experience with her." I followed her into their living room, which was decorated with colorful kid toys and family photos. Jenny's husband, Tom, was working from home and came out of his office when he heard us talking. "We've had nothing but problems with Brenda since we moved in 3 years ago," Tom said, sitting down heavily on the couch. "First, she cited us for having a trampoline in our backyard, said it was against HOA rules because it was an attractive nuisance. We had to take it down, even though other neighbors have trampolines. Then she complained about our kids being too loud when they played outside," Jenny added. "Mind you, this was at 3 in the afternoon on a Saturday, but she insisted they were violating noise ordinances." "The worst was last year," Tom said. "We wanted to paint our front door a dark blue color. The HOA rules say doors can be any tasteful color. We submitted our request and Brenda rejected it, saying blue wasn't appropriate. We appealed to the full board and they overruled her, so we painted the door. The next week, she fined us for not getting proper approval, even though we had followed the process exactly." "Did you fight the fine?" I asked. "We tried," Jenny said. "But by the time we went through the appeals process, she had stacked the next board meeting with items that made us look like troublemakers. She's really good at manipulating the narrative. We ended up just paying the fine because we couldn't afford to hire a lawyer." This was worse than I thought. "How many other neighbors has she done this to?" Tom shrugged. "At least 4 or 5 that I know of. There's a couple on the next street over who got into a huge fight with her over their landscaping, and old Mr. Chen had issues with her about his holiday decorations." "Has anyone ever successfully fought back against her?" I asked. Jenny and Tom exchanged glances. "Not really," Tom said. "Most people just try to fly under her radar and avoid making waves. But that wasn't my style. I had done nothing wrong, and I wasn't about to pay a $500 fine just to appease Brenda's ego." I thanked the porters for their time and headed home to make some phone calls. I found a local attorney named Rebecca Martinez, who specialized in HOA disputes. Her office was in downtown Phoenix, and she agreed to see me that afternoon. Rebecca was in her early 40s, sharply dressed, and had a reputation for not backing down from difficult cases. After I explained the situation, including showing her all the documentation, Rebecca leaned back in her chair and nodded. "Unfortunately, this kind of thing is more common than you'd think. HOAs can be breeding grounds for petty tyrants, especially when the bylaws give the president too much unilateral power." "So what are my options?" I asked. "Well, you can go through the internal appeals process like they said," Rebecca explained. "But based on what you've told me about the board composition, that's probably not going to work. Your better option might be to rally other homeowners who have had similar issues and push for a recall of the board, or at least Brenda specifically. Can we do that?" Most HOA bylaws include provisions for recalls, but they usually require a petition signed by a certain percentage of homeowners. You'd need to check your specific bylaws. She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "In the meantime, I'd recommend not paying the fine. Let them escalate it. If they try to place a lien on your property, then we have grounds for a lawsuit." "Won't that hurt my credit or something?" I asked nervously. "Not immediately. The process takes months, sometimes over a year. And honestly, based on the facts here, I don't think any judge would uphold their lien. You have documented proof that you did nothing wrong, and that the actual safety hazard was on the HOA president's property. It's pretty clear this is retaliatory." I hired Rebecca on the spot, feeling better about having professional help. That evening, I went back through the HOA bylaws and found the recall provision. It required a petition signed by 40% of homeowners, followed by a special meeting and a vote. It was doable, but it would take work. I spent the next 2 weeks going door to door in the neighborhood, talking to homeowners about their experiences with Brenda and the HOA. What I found was shocking. Out of the 73 houses in our development, I found documented issues with Brenda's leadership affecting at least 23 households. Some of the stories were petty, like complaints about mailbox placement or house number fonts. But others were serious, including one case where Brenda had tried to force an elderly widow to remove her late husband's memorial bench from her front yard, claiming it violated aesthetic guidelines. The more people I talked to, the more supporters I gained for the recall effort. Many homeowners were afraid to speak up individually, but they were willing to sign a petition if enough others did too. I created a simple document laying out the reasons for the recall, focusing on Brenda's pattern of arbitrary enforcement, retaliation, and abuse of power. By the end of the 3rd week, I had signatures from 38 households, representing just over 50% of the community. It was more than enough to trigger a recall vote. I submitted the petition to the HOA board by certified mail, as required by the bylaws. According to the rules, the board had to schedule a special meeting within 30 days to address the recall petition. Brenda's response was swift and predictable. The next day, I found another letter in my mailbox. This one informed me that my fine had been increased to $1,000 due to failure to pay within the designated time frame, and that I was now also being cited for creating discord within the community by spreading false information about HOA leadership. The new fine for creating discord was $500. Total amount due, $1,500, due within 7 days or the HOA would begin lien proceedings. I forwarded everything to Rebecca, who actually laughed when she read it. "This is perfect," she said over the phone. "She's digging herself deeper. Keep documenting everything." The special meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening, exactly 30 days from when I submitted the petition. The meeting was to be held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that was used for HOA gatherings and the occasional neighborhood party. In the days leading up to the meeting, Brenda went into overdrive. She sent out a mass email to all homeowners, claiming that I was a troublemaker who was trying to undermine the HOA's ability to maintain property values. She made vague accusations about my property maintenance, none of which were true, and suggested that I was trying to turn the neighborhood into a free-for-all with no rules. Several of the homeowners who had signed my petition called me, worried about Brenda's email. I reassured them that everything she was saying was either false or misleading, and I sent out my own email with copies of all the documentation, including Mike's report showing that my propane system was fine and that the leak had been on Brenda's property. The night of the meeting arrived. I showed up 30 minutes early with Rebecca, who had agreed to attend as my attorney. The community center was already filling up with neighbors. I was surprised and heartened to see how many people had shown up. The room held about 60 people comfortably, and it was standing room only. Brenda arrived right at the scheduled start time, flanked by the 4 other board members. She looked composed, but I could see tension in the way she held her shoulders. She took her place at the head table and called the meeting to order. "This special meeting has been called to address a recall petition submitted by Stephen Yates," Brenda began, her voice cold. "Before we proceed, I want to remind everyone that this recall is based on false accusations and personal grievances, not on any actual wrongdoing." Rebecca stood up. "Point of order," The HOA president should not be presiding over a meeting about her own recall. That's a clear conflict of interest. Brenda's jaw tightened. The bylaws state that the president presides over all official HOA meetings. The bylaws also state that in cases of conflict of interest, the vice president should preside, Rebecca countered, holding up her copy of the bylaws. This is clearly a conflict of interest. There was murmuring among the crowd. Patricia, the vice president, looked uncomfortable but nodded. She's right, Brenda. I should run this meeting. For a moment I thought Brenda might refuse, but she finally stood and moved to a different seat, her face flushed with anger. Patricia took over, looking nervous but determined. Okay, so we're here to discuss the recall petition, Patricia said. Stephen, would you like to present your case? I stood up, my hands slightly shaky but my voice steady. Thank you. I'm not here because I have a personal problem with Brenda. I'm here because I believe she has abused her position as HOA president, and I'm not the only one who thinks so. I went through the key points, starting with my own experience with the propane complaint and the retaliatory fines, then moving on to other examples from neighbors who had agreed to let me share their stories. I kept it factual and unemotional, letting the pattern of behavior speak for itself. When I finished, several other homeowners stood up to share their own experiences. Mr. Chen talked about how Brenda had forced him to take down his Christmas lights 2 days after Christmas because they violated some obscure rule about holiday decorations. The widow with the memorial bench, Mrs. Sullivan, spoke through tears about how Brenda had threatened her with daily fines if she didn't remove the bench that honored her late husband. Tom Porter talked about the trampoline and the door incident. By the time the fifth person had spoken, the mood in the room had shifted completely. Even some of Brenda's supporters looked troubled. Finally, Brenda stood up to defend herself. I understand that some of you are upset, but everything I've done has been in accordance with the HOA bylaws and for the good of the community. We have rules for a reason, and if we don't enforce them consistently, property values will decline. But you don't enforce them consistently, someone called out from the back. You only enforce them against people you don't like. That's not true, Brenda said, her voice rising. I enforce the rules equally for everyone. Then, why does Mrs. Peterson have a trampoline and the Porters got cited for theirs? Another voice called out. And why did you approve tan shutters for the Kellys but rejected them for the Martins? Someone else added. The meeting was starting to devolve into chaos. Patricia banged the gavel, trying to restore order. Okay, everyone, let's stay focused. We're here to vote on whether to recall Brenda from her position as president. According to the bylaws, this requires a majority vote of all homeowners present. Rebecca stood again. Actually, the bylaws state it requires a majority of all homeowners in the community, not just those present at the meeting. That means we need 37 votes for the recall to pass. This was the tricky part. We had signatures from 38 households on the petition, but that didn't guarantee they would all vote yes at the actual meeting. And we needed 37 votes out of the 73 total households. Patricia distributed ballots, and everyone voted by secret ballot. The wait while the ballots were counted felt like forever. I sat next to Rebecca, watching as Patricia and another board member counted and recounted the votes. Finally, Patricia stood up, looking at the paper in her hand with an expression I couldn't read. The results of the recall vote are as follows: 42 votes in favor of recall, 18 votes against, and 13 abstentions or absent. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Brenda's face went pale, then red. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair over. This is ridiculous. You're all making a huge mistake. Without proper leadership, this neighborhood will fall apart. I think we'll be fine, Patricia said quietly. Brenda, I'm sorry, but effective immediately, you're no longer the HOA president. We'll need you to turn over all HOA records and materials within 48 hours. Brenda grabbed her purse and stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door behind her. The remaining board members looked at each other uncertainly. So what happens now? One of them asked. Now we elect a new president, Patricia said. But let's do that at our next regular meeting. For tonight, I think we've had enough excitement. People started filing out, many stopping to shake my hand or thank me for standing up to Brenda. Mr. Henderson clapped me on the shoulder. That took courage, son. This has been a long time coming. I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. Rebecca looked pleased. That went better than expected. Now, about those fines she levied against you. What about them? I asked. They're void. She had no authority to issue them in the first place, and now that she's been recalled, there's no way the HOA can enforce them. I'll send the board a formal letter just to make it official, but you're in the clear. Over the next few weeks, things gradually returned to normal. Patricia took over as acting president, and the board scheduled an election for a permanent president. They also formed a committee to review all the citations and fines Brenda had issued over the past 2 years to determine which ones were legitimate and which ones should be overturned. Unsurprisingly, they found that about 40% of Brenda's enforcement actions were either improperly issued or showed clear evidence of bias. Many homeowners got refunds for fines they had paid under protest. I thought that would be the end of the story, but life had one more twist in store. About 6 weeks after the recall vote, I was at home on a Saturday morning when I heard sirens outside. I looked out my window and saw fire trucks and police cars converging on Brenda's house. I grabbed Max's leash and headed outside, along with several other curious neighbors. We kept a respectful distance while emergency responders worked. After about an hour, I saw Mike, the propane technician who had found the leak on Brenda's property, talking to a fire investigator. Mr. Henderson came over to where I was standing. Did you hear what happened? No, what? Apparently, there was a propane explosion in Brenda's backyard, blew out some windows and damaged her patio. She's okay, just shaken up, but it could have been much worse. My stomach dropped. Did she ever get her propane system fixed? I don't think so, Mr. Henderson said. I saw her using her grill last weekend, so maybe she thought she had fixed it herself. Later that day, I got a call from Mike. Hey, Stephen, I wanted to give you a heads up. The fire investigator asked me about my previous inspection of your neighbor's property. Turns out she never got the repairs done and just turned the gas back on herself. The leak caused a buildup of gas under her patio, and when she lit her grill this morning, boom. That's crazy, I said. Could she face charges for that? Possibly, Mike said. I filed a report with the fire marshal after I found the leak, as required by law. She was legally obligated to have the repairs done before using the system again. If she ignored that, she could be looking at reckless endangerment charges, especially if the explosion had damaged neighboring properties or hurt someone. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Brenda had been charged with reckless endangerment and violation of fire safety codes. Apparently, the explosion had caused minor damage to the Hendersons' fence, and one of their windows had cracked from the blast. That was enough to elevate it beyond just a property damage issue. The legal proceedings took months to work their way through the system. Brenda hired an expensive attorney and tried to fight the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. Mike's initial report, the fire marshal's documentation, and witness statements from multiple neighbors all painted a clear picture of someone who had ignored a serious safety hazard out of either negligence or stubbornness. In the end, Brenda took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to reckless endangerment and was sentenced to 6 months of probation, community service, and a substantial fine. She also had to pay restitution to the Hendersons for the damage to their property. The judge gave her a stern lecture about the importance of following safety regulations and not letting pride get in the way of common sense. The whole experience changed the dynamic of our neighborhood in ways I never expected. With Brenda gone, the HOA board took a hard look at the bylaws and made several amendments to prevent any one person from having too much unilateral power. They created a formal appeals process for citations and fines, established clear criteria for enforcement actions, and required board votes for any fines over $100. Patricia was elected as the new president, and she proved to be fair and reasonable. She focused on the things that actually mattered, like maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events, rather than nitpicking over minor rule violations. I finally got to enjoy my backyard barbecues in peace. The Porters put their trampoline back up, and their kids' laughter became a regular soundtrack to weekend afternoons. Mr. Chen put up an elaborate holiday display that December, and nobody complained. Mrs. Sullivan's memorial bench stayed right where it was, and people often left flowers on it in honor of her late husband. As for Brenda, she put her house on the market about 3 months after her sentencing. I heard she moved to Tucson to be closer to her daughter. Part of me felt bad for how things had turned out for her, but mostly I felt relieved that she was no longer making everyone's life miserable over petty rules and imagined slights. The whole situation taught me some valuable lessons about standing up for yourself and not letting bullies, even bureaucratic ones, push you around. It also showed me the importance of community, how neighbors can come together when someone is abusing their power. I never did send Brenda a thank you note for complaining about my propane setup, though maybe I should have. After all, if she hadn't made that call, the leak on her property might not have been discovered until something truly catastrophic happened. Her pettiness and vindictiveness had inadvertently led to the discovery of a serious safety hazard on her own property. There was a certain poetic justice in that. On a warm Saturday afternoon about 8 months after the whole ordeal began, I was in my backyard grilling steaks for a neighborhood potluck. The Porters were there with their kids. The Hendersons had brought a salad. Even Mr. Chen showed up with some homemade spring rolls. About 20 neighbors gathered in my backyard, enjoying good food and good company. "This is nice," Jenny Porter said, standing next to me while I flipped the steaks. "I'm glad you moved here, Stephen. Even with all the drama, you made this neighborhood better." "I just wanted to grill in peace," I said with a laugh. "Well, mission accomplished," she said, raising her beer in a toast. As the sun set over Scottsdale and my neighbors chatted and laughed around me, I felt genuinely content. The house I had bought as a quiet refuge had ended up being the center of a neighborhood drama, but we had all come out stronger on the other side. Max was running around the yard, playing with the Porter kids, his tail wagging non-stop. The smell of grilling meat mixed with the desert evening air. Someone had brought a portable speaker, and music played softly in the background. Rebecca, my attorney, had even stopped by for a bit. She declined a beer but accepted a burger. "You know, most of my HOA cases don't end this well," she said. "Usually, people either give up or spend years in litigation. You actually changed something." "I had good support," I said, gesturing to the crowd of neighbors. "True, but you were the catalyst. You stood up when others were too afraid or too tired to fight. That matters." After everyone left that evening, I sat on my back patio with Max at my feet, enjoying the quiet. My grill sat beside me, clean and ready for the next cookout. There were no angry HOA presidents to worry about, no false citations, no retaliatory fines. Just peace, finally. Looking back, the whole situation seemed almost surreal. A simple complaint about a propane smell had spiraled into recall votes, criminal charges, and a complete restructuring of our HOA. But that's what happens when someone abuses power and runs into someone unwilling to back down. The new HOA board was working well. They had implemented all the reforms they promised and were focused on actually serving the community rather than ruling over it. Property values in our neighborhood had actually increased slightly over the past few months, disproving Brenda's dire predictions about what would happen without her strict enforcement. I sometimes wondered if Brenda ever reflected on what had happened, if she understood how her actions had led to her downfall. Probably not. People like that rarely do. They always find a way to blame others for their problems. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I had my house, my dog, my grill, and a neighborhood full of friends. Life was good. The following spring, I got an email from Patricia asking if I would be interested in joining the HOA board. They had an opening for a general board member, and several people had suggested my name. I thought about it for a few days before declining politely. I had done my part by standing up to Brenda and helping to reform the system. I didn't need to be on the board to be an engaged community member. Instead, I volunteered to help with the neighborhood newsletter and offered to organize a quarterly neighborhood barbecue series. That was more my speed, bringing people together rather than enforcing rules. The first neighborhood barbecue of the summer was a huge success. Over 40 people showed up, and we raised some money for new playground equipment in the common area. Kids ran around playing while adults chatted and ate. It was exactly the kind of community gathering our neighborhood needed. As I was cleaning up afterward, Tom Porter came over to help. You know, before all this happened with Brenda, people kept to themselves a lot more, he said. Everyone was afraid of getting cited for something, so they didn't really interact. Now it feels like an actual community. He was right. The neighborhood had changed fundamentally. People weren't afraid anymore. They decorated their houses for holidays, let their kids play outside without constant supervision, and actually talked to each other instead of just waving from their cars. One afternoon in early July, I was mowing my lawn when a moving truck pulled up to Brenda's old house. A young couple got out, looking excited and a little nervous. I finished the section I was working on and walked over to introduce myself. "Hi, I'm Stephen. I live a few houses down," I said, shaking their hands. "I'm Mike, and this is my wife, Sarah," the man said. "We just closed on this place yesterday." "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said. "It's a great community, very friendly HOA." Sarah laughed. "That's good to hear." We were worried because our realtor mentioned there had been some issues with the previous owner and the HOA. There were, I admitted, but we worked through them. The HOA is much better now. If you have any questions or need anything, feel free to ask. We chatted for a few more minutes before I left them to their move. It felt good to welcome new neighbors without having to warn them about an overbearing HOA president. That evening, I got a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw it was from Brenda. My stomach tightened as I read. "I heard you met the new owners of my house. I hope you're happy. You destroyed my life." I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but part of me felt like she needed to hear the truth. I typed out a response. "I'm sorry things turned out the way they did, but I didn't destroy your life. You made choices that had consequences. I hope you're doing better in Tucson." She didn't respond, and I blocked the number. I didn't need that negativity in my life. As summer turned to fall, life in the neighborhood continued to improve. The new playground equipment was installed, and it became a popular gathering spot for families. The HOA organized a Halloween party that was a huge hit with kids and adults alike. Our little community was thriving. I started dating someone I met at a coffee shop downtown, a teacher named Felicity Johnson who thought my HOA story was hilarious and couldn't believe someone would be that petty over a propane smell. We started spending weekends together, and she loved Max, which was important to me. One Saturday in November, Felicity and I were grilling in my backyard when the Hendersons came over with a pie. "We wanted to thank you," Mrs. Henderson said, "for everything you did to make this neighborhood better." "You didn't have to do that," I said, though I accepted the pie gratefully. "We wanted to," Mr. Henderson said. "Before you stood up to Brenda, this place felt oppressive. Now it feels like home." After they left, Felicity looked at me with admiration. "You really did something special here, didn't you?" "I just didn't want to pay an unfair fine," I said, deflecting. "No, you did more than that. You changed an entire community for the better. That's pretty amazing." I pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Want to know a secret?" "What?" "I still just want to grill in peace." She laughed, and the sound mixed with the evening air and the smell of cooking food and the feeling of Max bumping against my leg, and I realized I had everything I needed right there. The story could have ended differently. I could have just paid the fine and kept my head down. Brenda would have continued her reign of petty tyranny, and the neighborhood would have remained a place where people felt oppressed by their own HOA. But I chose to fight back, and that made all the difference. Not just for me, but for everyone who had been suffering in silence, too afraid or too tired to stand up for themselves. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to say no to injustice for things to change. As Christmas approached, I decided to put up an elaborate light display, something I had always wanted to do but had been hesitant about under Brenda's rule. I went all out, covering my house in lights, putting up a Santa and reindeer display, and even adding some of those inflatable decorations. It was probably a bit much, but I didn't care. The night I turned on the lights for the first time, several neighbors came out to admire them. Kids pointed and squealed with delight. Tom Porter whistled appreciatively. "Now that's a Christmas display," he said. "Think it violates any HOA rules." I joked. "Who cares?" he said with a grin. "Live your life, man," and that really summed up the new attitude in our neighborhood. Live your life. Follow the rules that matter, be considerate of your neighbors, but don't let arbitrary enforcement and petty bureaucracy control you. The holidays were joyful that year. The neighborhood looked festive and welcoming. There was a Christmas party at the community center where kids sang carols and adults drank spiked cider. It was exactly what a neighborhood should be. On Christmas Eve, Felicity and I were sitting by my fireplace, Max asleep at our feet, when she said, "I've been thinking about getting a place in this neighborhood. What do you think?" My heart skipped a beat. "Really?" "Yeah, I love it here. The people are great, the HOA isn't crazy, and I'd be close to my favorite guy and his dog." I kissed her, feeling happier than I had in years. I think that would be amazing. Life had a funny way of working out. What started as a nightmare scenario with an overbearing HOA president had turned into a complete transformation of my life and my community. I had stood up to a bully, made real friends with my neighbors, found love, and created a home in the truest sense of the word. As the new year approached, Patricia sent out an email to all homeowners with a survey about HOA priorities for the coming year. The questions were thoughtful and focused on actual community needs rather than enforcement of petty rules. It was a stark contrast to Brenda's leadership style. I filled out the survey, suggesting things like more community events, better maintenance of the walking trails, and maybe a neighborhood newsletter to keep everyone informed and connected. These were the things that actually mattered, the things that built community rather than tearing it down. On New Year's Eve, several neighbors gathered in the Porter's backyard for a casual party. As midnight approached, we all counted down together, and when the clock struck 12, there were hugs and cheers and a genuine feeling of hope for the year ahead. I looked around at these people who had become true friends, this neighborhood that had become a real community, and I felt grateful. Grateful that I had stood up for what was right. Grateful that others had found the courage to join me. Grateful for all the good that had come from that one absurd complaint about a propane smell. Max barked at the fireworks going off in the distance, and I scratched his ears. "What do you think, buddy? Good year?" His tail wagged, which I took as a yes. As the party wound down and Felicity and I walked back to my house, hand in hand, she said, "You know what I love most about this story?" "What?" "It shows that standing up for yourself matters. You could have just paid the fine and moved on, but you didn't. And because of that, you made life better for dozens of people." "I had help," I reminded her. "Sure, but you started it. You were the catalyst. Never underestimate the power of one person refusing to accept injustice." We reached my house and I unlocked the door, letting Max run inside ahead of us. The Christmas lights were still on, casting a warm glow over everything. I could see my grill on the back patio through the window, waiting for the next weekend cookout. Life was good. Really, truly good. And all because I had refused to be bullied over a propane smell that wasn't even coming from my property. The final chapter of the Brenda saga came in February. I got a call from the Scottsdale fire marshal's office. They were closing out their investigation into the explosion at Brenda's former property and wanted to confirm some details with me. I provided them with everything I knew, including copies of Mike's original inspection report and the timeline of events. The investigator thanked me and mentioned that the case was being used as an example in fire safety training courses about the importance of homeowner compliance with safety orders. If that technician hadn't found the leak when he did, and if someone hadn't pushed the issue, this could have been much worse, the investigator told me. Sometimes these things kill people. Your neighbor was lucky. After hanging up, I sat quietly for a moment thinking about that. For all of Brenda's nastiness and vindictive behavior, I had never wanted her to get hurt. The explosion could have killed her or someone else. In a weird way, her petty complaint about my grill had probably saved her life. I never heard from Brenda again after that one text message. I hoped she was doing better in Tucson, that maybe she had learned something from the experience. But even if she hadn't, I had learned plenty. I learned that communities function best when there's genuine leadership rather than authoritarian control. I learned that standing up to bullies, even bureaucratic ones, is worth the effort. I learned that my neighbors were good people who just needed someone to take the first step. Most importantly, I learned that home is more than just a house you own. It's a community you're part of, relationships you build, and a place where you feel safe and welcome. I had all of that now, thanks in large part to the ridiculous propane incident that had started everything. Spring arrived in Scottsdale with warm sunshine and blooming flowers. My first full year in the house was coming up, and I decided to throw a party to celebrate. Not just for me, but for the whole neighborhood, to commemorate how far we had all come. The party was scheduled for a Saturday in mid-March, and the weather cooperated perfectly. I fired up my grill early, the same grill that had been at the center of so much drama, and cooked enough food to feed an army. Neighbors brought side dishes and desserts. Someone set up a volleyball net. Kids played while adults talked and laughed. At one point, Patricia came over to where I was manning the grill. "You know, the board voted last night to give you the Good Neighbor Award this year." "There's a Good Neighbor Award?" I asked, surprised. "There is now," she said with a smile. "We created it specifically for you. You're going to get a little plaque at the next community meeting." "That's really not necessary," I said, embarrassed. "Maybe not, but we want to do it anyway. You changed this place for the better, Stephen. We're grateful." As the party continued into the evening, I looked around at the crowd of happy neighbors and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what community was supposed to be. Not rules and regulations and petty enforcement, but people coming together, supporting each other and making their shared space better. Mike and Sarah, the couple who had bought Brenda's old house, were there too, already integrated into the neighborhood social scene. They had told me privately that when they were house hunting, they almost passed on the house because of concerns about the HOA. But after meeting me and some other neighbors and learning about the recent reforms, they had felt confident buying in. That's what good governance does. It creates confidence and stability, not fear and resentment. As the last guests left that night and I cleaned up with Felicity's help, I felt content in a way I never had before. My gamble in buying this house, my decision to fight back against Brenda, all of it had paid off in ways I never could have imagined. "Tired?" Felicity asked, loading paper plates into a trash bag. "Exhausted," I admitted, "but happy." "Good," she said, kissing my cheek. "You should be. You earned it." Max was already passed out on the couch inside, worn out from playing with all the neighbor kids. I looked at my grill, now clean and covered for the night, and smiled. That simple piece of equipment had been the catalyst for so much change. Who knew that a false complaint about propane could lead to all of this? A recalled HOA president, criminal charges, community reforms, new friendships, and even romance. Life was strange and unpredictable, but in this case, it had all worked out. The story of Brenda and the propane incident became something of a legend in our neighborhood. New residents heard about it and marveled at the drama. Longtime residents used it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked HOA power. And I got used to being known as the guy who stood up to the HOA and won. But more than any individual recognition, I was proud of what we had all built together in the aftermath. A real community, where people looked out for each other, where reasonable rules were followed but pettiness was rejected, where neighbors were friends rather than adversaries. That was the real victory, not over Brenda specifically, but over the mindset that HOAs exist to control and restrict rather than to serve and support. Our neighborhood had learned that lesson, and we were all better for it. As I turned off the back porch light that night and headed inside, I paused for one last look at my backyard. The grill, the patio furniture, the fence line where Mike's gas detector had first started beeping, pointing not to my property but to Brenda's. It all seemed so long ago now, though it had only been about 1 year. That's all it had taken to completely transform a neighborhood, to go from fear and resentment to community and friendship, to turn a petty complaint into a movement for change. I went inside, locked the door, and headed to bed with Max following behind me. Tomorrow was Sunday, and I had promised to help Mr. Chen with some yard work. Next weekend, there was another neighborhood barbecue planned. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm, the kind of peaceful existence I had wanted when I bought the house in the first place. The propane incident was behind us now, a story we told but no longer lived. Brenda was gone, the HOA was reformed, and our little corner of Scottsdale was thriving. Sometimes standing up for what's right requires courage and persistence, but the rewards are worth it. As I drifted off to sleep that night, my last thought was a simple one. I was glad I had bought this house. Despite everything, or perhaps because of everything, it had become exactly what I had been looking for: a home.